The sun hung low over the endless expanse of golden dunes, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the desert battlefield. Sand whipped through the air in angry gusts, stinging exposed skin and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The war between humanity and the alien faction known as the Veilith had dragged on for years, but today felt different, charged with an electricity that crackled in the dry heat. Commander Arenthal strode confidently across the scorched sands, her armored boots leaving faint imprints behind her. She was tall even by Veilith standards, her sleek silver armor gleaming despite being coated in fine dust from hours of combat. Her elongated ears twitched at every sound, catching whispers carried by the wind. Unlike most of her species, who favored cold logic over emotion, Arenthal's piercing violet eyes betrayed something deeper, a curiosity about this strange world she fought on and its stubborn inhabitants. Across the battlefield, crouched behind the remnants of a shattered tank, was Captain Callum Drake. He wasn't what anyone would call heroic-looking. His face was smudged with dirt, his dark hair disheveled, and his uniform patched up so many times it barely resembled regulation attire. But there was no denying his reputation among his men. He was relentless, resourceful, and fiercely loyal. Right now, though, he wasn't thinking about strategy or survival. His gaze was fixed intently on the figure moving effortlessly through the chaos. Commander Arenthal, why are you staring at me? Her voice cut through the din of battle like a blade slicing silk. Startled, Callum realized she'd noticed him watching her. Worse still, she'd approached close enough to confront him directly. Her tone wasn't hostile. It carried a hint of amusement, almost playful. But her posture remained poised for action, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of her plasma blade. Callum froze, caught red-handed. For a moment, all he could do was stare back, taking in the sharp angles of her face, the shimmering metallic strands woven into her silvery hair, and those mesmerizing violet eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. Because... He began hesitantly, then stopped himself. What could he possibly say? That she looked utterly unlike anything he'd ever seen? That her presence alone made the rest of the battlefield fade away? "You're dazzling," he blurted out before he could stop himself. Arenthal blinked, clearly taken aback. A soft hum emanated from her throat, a sound humans had come to recognize as laughter among the Veilith. Then, to Callum's utter astonishment, she blushed. The tips of her pointed ears turned a faint shade of lavender, and a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. It was a fleeting expression, gone almost as soon as it appeared, but it left Callum feeling oddly lightheaded. "Well," she said finally, tilting her head slightly, "that's not a response I expected from someone trying to kill me." Callum chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, truce." She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "A truce? In the middle of a battlefield? What can I say?" He shrugged, offering her a sheepish grin. "You've got charisma." Her lips quirked again, though this time she didn't laugh. Instead, she glanced around at the carnage surrounding them. The twisted wreckage of vehicles, the bodies of fallen soldiers from both sides, the acrid smoke curling toward the sky. "This is madness," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "All of it." Callum followed her gaze, his humor fading. "It doesn't have to be," he said quietly. "We don't have to keep doing this." For a moment they simply stood there, two adversaries locked in a silent standoff. The sounds of distant gunfire echoed faintly, a reminder that the fight raged on elsewhere. Yet here, in this small pocket of calm, something shifted. Neither moved to attack the other. Neither reached for their weapon. And when Arenthal finally spoke again, her voice was softer, tinged with something akin to regret. "You humans are strange creatures," she admitted. "So fragile, yet so determined. So quick to anger, yet capable of such unexpected kindness." Callum couldn't help but smirk. "And you aliens are just full of surprises." Before she could respond, a deafening explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. Both turned instinctively toward the source, a massive plume of fire erupting near the horizon. Somewhere in the distance, reinforcements were arriving, and neither side could afford to linger. With a reluctant sigh, Arenthal stepped back, her expression hardening once more. "This isn't over," she warned, though her tone lacked conviction. "No," Callum agreed, meeting her gaze steadily. "But maybe it doesn't have to end the way we think." As she disappeared into the swirling sands, Callum found himself wondering if he just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the first step toward changing everything. Hours later, the battle showed no signs of slowing down. Reinforcements poured onto the field from both sides, turning the once sparsely populated desert into a chaotic maelstrom of clashing forces. Lasers streaked across the sky, lighting up the twilight like fireworks gone horribly wrong. Explosions rocked the earth, sending shockwaves rippling outward and forcing everyone to keep moving or risk being buried alive under collapsing dunes. Amidst the chaos, Callum found himself separated from his unit. Smoke filled his lungs, and his ears rang from the constant barrage of noise. Every step felt heavier than the last, his body screaming for rest after days of non-stop fighting. Still, he pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the nagging thought that somewhere out there, Arenthal might still be alive, and perhaps, just perhaps, willing to listen. He spotted her near the edge of a crumbling ridge, barking orders to a group of Valeth warriors while simultaneously deflecting blasts with her plasma blade. Even in the midst of destruction, she moved with a grace that defied logic, each motion precise and calculated. Callum hesitated, torn between admiration and the gnawing realization that he should probably be aiming a weapon at her instead of gawking like a lovesick teenager. But then something happened that snapped him out of his reverie. One of her soldiers, a young Valeth male with iridescent green scales, was struck by a stray laser blast, collapsing to the ground with a pained cry. Without hesitation, Arenthal abandoned her defensive stance and rushed to his side, shielding him with her own body. The act was instinctive, protective, an echo of the same instincts that drove human commanders to put themselves in harm's way for their troops. Callum's heart clenched. Against all odds, he understood her. Not because they shared the same biology or culture, but because leadership came with its own universal language, sacrifice, duty, and an unshakable desire to protect those who depended on you. Summoning his courage, he broke cover and sprinted toward her position. Bullets whizzed past his head, and the ground erupted in geysers of sand where explosives landed too close for comfort. He dove behind a rocky outcrop mere feet away from her, panting heavily as adrenaline coursed through his veins. "Are you insane?" Arenthal hissed, glaring at him as if he'd personally orchestrated the entire war. "What are you doing here?" "I told you," he shot back, grinning despite the absurdity of the situation. "Truce." She rolled her eyes, but there was no real venom in the gesture. "Your timing is atrocious." "Yeah, well, so's your taste in enemies." He jerked his thumb toward the ongoing skirmish. "Look, I know we're supposed to hate each other, but how much longer are we going to let them dictate our lives? This isn't about us. It's about people scared of what they don't understand." Arenthal studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed and gestured for him to follow her. Together, they retreated further away from the main conflict, finding temporary refuge in the shadow of a jagged rock formation. The injured Valeth soldier lay unconscious nearby, his breathing shallow but steady. "You talk a lot for someone who's outnumbered," she remarked dryly, though her tone held none of the hostility from earlier. Callum shrugged, leaning against the cool stone. "Maybe I'm hoping you'll find me charming enough to spare my life." She snorted, crossing her arms. "Charming won't save you if my superiors discover I'm fraternizing with the enemy. Then maybe it's time we stop letting them decide who the enemy is," he countered, his voice growing serious. "Think about it, Arenthal. How many lives could we save if we worked together instead of tearing each other apart?" Her silence stretched long enough to make him wonder if he'd pushed too far. But then she looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw something flicker in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or the beginnings of trust. "You're either very brave or very foolish," she said softly. "Possibly both." "Probably both," he admitted with a wry grin. "But hey, at least I'm entertaining." Despite herself, Arenthal laughed. A rich, melodic sound that seemed to lighten the oppressive weight of the battlefield. For the first time in what felt like forever, Callum allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way out of this mess. Little did they know, however, that their tentative alliance was about to face its greatest test yet. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a new threat loomed, one that neither side had anticipated, and one that would force them to confront not only their differences but also the true cost of war. As dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the battlefield fell eerily quiet. The opposing armies had withdrawn temporarily, regrouping to assess their losses and strategize their next move. Callum and Arenthal remained hidden within the rocky alcove, their conversation shifting from cautious diplomacy to uneasy camaraderie. "So," Callum began, breaking the silence, Do you always charge into danger without thinking? Or am I just lucky enough to witness your reckless side? Arenthal shot him a sidelong glance, her lips curving into a faint smile. Reckless? Coming from a human who charges headfirst into battles with nothing but enthusiasm and bad jokes. That's rich. Hey, I'll have you know my jokes are top-tier material, he protested, feigning offense. Besides, enthusiasm counts for something. It must, she replied, her tone teasing. Otherwise, I wouldn't still be talking to you. Their banter was interrupted by a low groan from the injured Valeth soldier. Arenthal immediately knelt beside him, checking his vitals with practiced precision. Callum watched her work, struck by the tenderness in her movements. Despite her formidable reputation as a warrior, she possessed a gentleness that reminded him of medics back home. People who saw beyond wounds and blood to the person underneath. He needs medical attention, she said eventually, rising to her feet. If we don't get him to a healer soon, he won't survive. Callum frowned, scanning the horizon. Our medic tents are miles away, and yours are probably worse off after that last bombardment. There has to be another option, Arenthal insisted, her voice tight with worry. We can't just leave him here. An idea sparked in Callum's mind, though it was risky. What if we take him to neutral territory? There's an old outpost about 10 clicks east of here. It's abandoned, but it might have supplies we can use. Her eyes narrowed suspiciously. Neutral territory doesn't exist in this war, human. Every inch of this planet is claimed by one side or the other. Not anymore, he countered. If we declare it neutral, it becomes neutral. At least for now. Arenthal hesitated, weighing the risks. Trusting him went against every instinct drilled into her since birth. Yet something about Callum's unwavering determination resonated with her. Perhaps it was his refusal to give up, even when faced with impossible odds. Or perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice when he spoke of saving her soldier. Fine, she relented finally. But if this is a trap, I'll make sure your death is slow and painful. Duly noted, Callum said with a grin, already moving to help lift the injured soldier onto a makeshift stretcher. Let's hope we live long enough to regret this decision. The journey to the outpost was grueling. The desert seemed determined to thwart them at every turn, with scorching temperatures during the day giving way to freezing nights. Sandstorms forced them to take shelter repeatedly, and the constant threat of patrols kept them on edge. Yet through it all, they managed to maintain an uneasy partnership, exchanging stories and observations that revealed surprising commonalities between their species. Callum learned that Arenthal had been chosen as a commander not only for her tactical brilliance, but also for her ability to inspire loyalty among her troops. She spoke fondly of her younger sister, a scientist working on interstellar communication technology, and confessed her frustration with the rigid hierarchy of Valeth society. In return, Callum shared tales of growing up in a small coastal town, his dreams of becoming an engineer dashed by the outbreak of war, and his guilt over surviving missions that claimed the lives of friends. By the time they reached the outpost, their bond had deepened in ways neither had anticipated. The structure itself was little more than a crumbling shell, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes and scorched by fire. Inside, however, they discovered a treasure trove of forgotten supplies, medical kits, ration packs, and even a functioning water purifier. As Arenthal tended to her soldier, Callum explored the building, uncovering relics of the past. Old maps lined the walls, detailing terrain that had long since shifted due to erosion and warfare. A dusty holoprojector flickered to life when he touched it, displaying grainy footage of humans and Valeth standing side by side during the early days of contact. A stark contrast to the animosity that defined their relationship now. This place? Arenthal murmured, joining him as he examined the images. It reminds me of why we came here in the first place. Exploration, understanding, cooperation. And look how far we've fallen, Callum finished grimly. Fear turned allies into enemies. She nodded, her expression somber. Maybe it's not too late to change that. Before either could elaborate, a sudden tremor shook the ground, nearly knocking them off their feet. Outside, the sky darkened unnaturally, clouds swirling into a vortex that pulsed with an eerie green light. From the center of the storm descended a massive ship, its design unlike anything either of them had ever seen. What in the name of? Callum trailed off, gripping his weapon tightly. Arenthal's eyes widened in alarm. That's not Valeth tech. No kidding, he muttered. And I doubt it's ours. As the ship hovered ominously above the outpost, a transmission crackled through the air, spoken in a language neither recognized. The message was brief but chilling. Surrender or perish. They're not here for negotiations, Arenthal said tersely, her hand instinctively reaching for her plasma blade. Callum swallowed hard, his mind racing. Looks like we've got bigger problems than each other. Side by side, they stepped outside to face whatever horrors awaited them, united by circumstance and bound by a fragile hope that somehow they could still rewrite the rules of this deadly game. The alien vessel loomed overhead, its shadow swallowing the desert whole. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Callum and Arenthal exchanged a glance, their earlier camaraderie replaced by grim resolve. Whatever this new threat was, it wasn't here to negotiate or broker peace. It was here to conquer. We need to get inside, Arenthal said sharply, her voice cutting through the oppressive tension. That ship is scanning for life forms. If we stay out here, we're dead. Callum nodded, already moving toward the outpost's entrance. But as they reached the doorway, a searing beam of light shot down from the sky, narrowly missing them and obliterating a nearby dune in a shower of sand and smoke. Callum stumbled backward, shielding his face from the debris, while Arenthal grabbed his arm and yanked him into the relative safety of the crumbling structure. Close one, he muttered, brushing dust off his jacket. His attempt at humor fell flat. Even he could hear the strain in his voice. Arenthal didn't respond immediately. Instead, she peered cautiously out of a shattered window, her violet eyes scanning the horizon. This isn't just another faction, she murmured, more to herself than to him. These beings, they're something else entirely. Callum joined her at the window, squinting against the glare of the alien ship. Well, whoever or whatever they are, they've got bad timing. A low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. Without warning, several smaller craft descended from the mothership, disgorging figures clad in sleek black armor that shimmered like liquid obsidian. They moved with terrifying precision, weapons raised and ready to fire. One group advanced on the outpost, their glowing red visors locking onto the building. They're coming for us, Arenthal said, her grip tightening on her plasma blade. She turned to Callum, her expression fierce but tinged with concern. Stay close to me. He gave her a lopsided grin, though his heart was pounding. Wouldn't dream of leaving your side. The ensuing battle was chaos incarnate. The alien invaders were relentless, their movements fluid and almost mechanical. Every strike they blocked seemed to anticipate their next move, as if they could predict their opponent's thoughts. Despite their superior numbers and firepower, however, Callum and Arenthal fought back with everything they had. Arenthal's plasma blade sliced through the air with lethal grace, deflecting bolts of energy and carving through enemy armor. Her agility was unmatched, her reflexes honed by years of combat training. Callum, meanwhile, relied on improvisation and sheer determination. He used the outpost's crumbling walls as cover, picking off targets with his rifle when he could and resorting to hand-to-hand combat when cornered. At one point, Callum found himself pinned down behind a fallen support beam, his ammunition nearly depleted. An invader closed in, its weapon trained directly on him. Just as despair began to creep in, a blur of silver streaked past. Arenthal tackled the creature with ferocious intensity, driving her blade into its chest before spinning to decapitate another with a single swipe. Don't make me save your life twice in one day, she shouted over her shoulder, her tone sharp but laced with relief. I'll try not to let it become a habit, he called back, scrambling to his feet. Their teamwork was instinctive now, born of hours spent fighting side by side. Each knew how the other would react without needing to ask, and their trust in one another grew stronger with every passing moment. It wasn't just survival driving them anymore. It was something deeper, something neither dared to name aloud. But even the best-laid plans can unravel. As the tide of the battle began to shift in their favor, a stray blast struck the wall above Callum, sending chunks of masonry crashing down around him. He dove to avoid the worst of it, but a jagged piece of rock caught him squarely in the side, knocking him to the ground. Pain exploded through his body, and he gasped for breath as blood soaked through his shirt. Callum! Arenthal's voice was sharp with panic. She abandoned her position and sprinted to his side, dropping to her knees beside him. Her hands hovered uncertainly over his wound, trembling slightly. No, no, no. I'm fine, he wheezed, though his pale face told a different story. Just give me a minute. You're not fine, she snapped, her voice breaking. For the first time since they'd met, her composure cracked wide open. Tears welled in her violet eyes as she pressed her hands firmly against the gash in his side, trying to staunch the bleeding. "You idiot! Why did you step into the line of fire? Professional hazard," he quipped weakly, managing a shaky smile despite the agony coursing through him. "Besides, I figured you'd miss me too much if I died." Her laugh was choked and watery, but it came nonetheless. "You're insufferable." The sound of approaching footsteps forced her to refocus. More invaders were closing in, their weapons trained on the pair. Arenthal hesitated, torn between staying with Callum and holding off their attackers. In the end, there was no choice. She couldn't leave him unprotected. Summoning every ounce of strength, she hoisted him onto her shoulders, ignoring his protests. "We're getting out of here," she growled, her voice steely despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "Hold on." With astonishing speed, she carried him deeper into the outpost, weaving through narrow corridors until they reached a hidden storeroom. Slamming the door shut behind them, she barricaded it with crates and debris before collapsing beside him, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. "This isn't how it ends," she whispered fiercely, pressing her forehead to his. "Do you hear me? You're not dying today." Callum wanted to argue, to tell her that she shouldn't waste her energy saving someone who might already be beyond help. But looking into her eyes, the raw emotion etched across her face. He couldn't bring himself to say the words. Instead, he reached up weakly and cupped her cheek, smearing dirt across her otherwise flawless skin. "You're dazzling, you know," he murmured, his voice barely audible. She blinked rapidly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "And you're infuriating." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the world outside fading away. Then, with renewed determination, Arenthal tore strips from her cloak and fashioned a makeshift bandage, applying pressure to his wound with steady hands. She worked quickly, her movements precise even as her emotions threatened to overwhelm her. When the worst of the bleeding slowed, she activated her communicator, contacting what remained of her forces. "I need extraction," she barked, her voice commanding once more. "Now." Moments later, a Valeth transport shuttle descended from the sky, its engines roaring as it touched down near the outpost. Arenthal hauled Callum to his feet, supporting most of his weight as they staggered toward the waiting vessel. The pilot, a young Valeth female named Celes, looked startled to see a human aboard, but Arenthal silenced any objections with a single glare. "Get us to medical," she ordered, laying Callum gently on a cot inside the shuttle. "Move." As the shuttle lifted off, Callum drifted in and out of consciousness, his vision swimming. Through the haze, he felt Arenthal's cool hand gripping his, her presence grounding him even as darkness threatened to pull him under. "You're going to be okay," she promised, her voice soft but unwavering. "I won't lose you." The days that followed were a blur of pain and healing. Callum underwent surgery aboard a Valeth medical frigate, where advanced technology repaired his injuries faster than human medicine ever could. Throughout it all, Arenthal stayed by his side, refusing to leave even when her superiors demanded her return to active duty. When he finally woke, groggy but alive, she was sitting beside him, her head resting on the edge of his bed. At the sound of his voice, she jerked awake, her violet eyes lighting up with relief. "You're awake," she breathed, reaching for his hand. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck," he admitted, wincing as he shifted. "But better than dead." She smiled faintly, though traces of worry lingered in her expression. "You scared me." He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze serious. "I'm sorry. That wasn't part of the plan." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy between them. Finally, Callum broke the quiet. "Arenthal, about earlier. What I said. I meant it," she interrupted, her voice firm yet tender. "Every word." His heart skipped a beat. "Even the part about being dazzling? Especially that part." A slow grin spread across his face, and she laughed softly, shaking her head. "You truly are impossible." "Yeah, well," he teased, "you're stuck with me now." For the first time in what felt like forever, they allowed themselves to hope, not just for survival but for something more, something worth fighting for. And as the frigate sailed through the stars, carrying them toward an uncertain future, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The war against the mysterious invaders stretched on for months, but Callum and Arenthal's bond only grew stronger with each passing day. Together, They became symbols of unity, not just between their own species, but as a beacon of hope for all who sought peace in the face of chaos. Their partnership turned the tide of battles, their strategies blending human ingenuity with Velith precision. Yet it wasn't just their combat skills that inspired others. It was the way they stood side by side, two beings from vastly different worlds proving that love could transcend even the deepest divides. When the conflict finally came to an end, thanks to a daring alliance forged by Callum and Arenthal themselves, the galaxy began to heal. Treaties were signed, borders redrawn, and trust painstakingly rebuilt. It wasn't easy, and tensions lingered for years, but the impossible had been achieved. Humanity and the Velith were no longer enemies. For Callum and Arenthal, however, the real journey was just beginning. After the dust settled, they found themselves standing on a quiet beach at sunset, far removed from the battlefield. The waves lapped gently at their feet, and the salty breeze carried promises of new beginnings. They had chosen this secluded planet, a neutral zone untouched by war, as their sanctuary. Here, they built a home together, a modest cottage nestled among rolling hills and endless oceans. Their wedding took place under the stars, attended by a small gathering of friends and family from both sides. Celes, the young Velith pilot who had helped save Callum's life, officiated the ceremony with tears shimmering in her golden eyes. Human soldiers mingled awkwardly but warmly with Velith dignitaries, sharing laughter and stories over plates of unfamiliar food. For one night, differences melted away, replaced by joy and celebration. As Callum slipped the ring onto Arenthal's finger, a simple band made of interwoven silver and titanium, he whispered, "You've always been my guiding star." "And you," she replied, her voice thick with emotion, "have shown me what it means to truly live." They sealed their vows with a kiss, surrounded by cheers and applause. That moment marked not only the union of two souls but also the birth of a new era, one where coexistence wasn't just a dream, but a reality. Years passed, and their little family grew in ways neither of them could have imagined. First came twins, a boy named Kalen, whose bright green eyes mirrored his mother's, and a girl named Lyra, whose curly hair and mischievous grin were unmistakably her father's. Then came another son, Torin, followed by yet another daughter, Nissa. Each child was a perfect blend of human and Velith traits, embodying the best of both worlds. Life on their peaceful planet was idyllic. Days were filled with laughter, exploration, and learning. The children ran barefoot through fields of wildflowers, chasing after glowing insects that lit up the twilight like tiny lanterns. Nights were spent gathered around a crackling fire, listening to Callum tell tales of his adventures or Arenthal sing ancient Velith songs that echoed hauntingly into the darkness. But it wasn't always easy. Raising children who straddled two cultures brought its own set of challenges. There were questions about identity, moments of doubt, and occasional clashes between tradition and modernity. Yet through it all, Callum and Arenthal led by example, teaching their kids the value of empathy, resilience, and open-mindedness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Callum sat on the porch with Arenthal, watching their children play in the distance. Kalen was attempting to teach Lyra how to ride a hoverboard, while Torin and Nissa built sandcastles near the shore. "They're going to change the world," Callum said softly, wrapping an arm around Arenthal's shoulders. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "They already have," he chuckled, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "You know, I never thought I'd end up here, married to an alien commander, raising half-human, half-Velith kids. Life sure has a funny way of surprising us." Arenthal smiled, her violet eyes sparkling with amusement. "Funny? Or wonderfully unpredictable?" "Both," he admitted, grinning. "Though I wouldn't trade any of it. Not even the part where you almost killed me that first time we met." "I still might," she teased, nudging him playfully. "Don't push your luck." Their laughter mingled with the sound of the waves, a melody of contentment and belonging. In that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the peace they had fought so hard to achieve, they knew they had found something rare and precious. Decades later, when their children had grown and ventured out into the galaxy to forge their own paths, Callum and Arenthal remained inseparable. Their hair had grayed, his streaked with silver, hers shimmering faintly like moonlight, but their love burned as brightly as ever. Hand in hand, they watched their grandchildren chase fireflies across the same fields where their own children had once played. On their final evening together, sitting beneath the same stars that had witnessed their wedding so many years ago, Callum turned to Arenthal and asked, "Do you think we did okay?" She smiled, her expression serene. "More than okay. We gave them a future worth fighting for, and a past worth remembering." As the stars twinkled above them, casting a soft glow over their intertwined hands, they drifted off to sleep, leaving behind a legacy of courage, compassion, and love that would ripple through generations to come. And though their story ended, the echoes of their journey lived on, in the hearts of their descendants, in the peace they had nurtured, and in the countless lives touched by their extraordinary bond.